The end is not near, but it is inevitable for all things, for all of us. It's the kind of thing that could sound trite coming from some people, but from Columbia University physicist and mathematician Brian Greene, it's the stepping off point for his thoughtful new book, Until the End of Time: Mind, Matter, and Our Search for Meaning in an Evolving Universe. And it brings Brian Greene to our studio. So nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
No one can see this right now, but let's just put this out there in the interest of full disclosure. You just herniated a disc in your back, and you are not at 100%.
No, but I'm going to fight through.
Well, I was going to say, we're grateful that in spite of it all, you decided to honor your commitment and come here today.
Thank you.
You write a book about the need for humans to tell stories.
Yeah.
So let's start there. What's the story you're trying to tell in this?
I'm trying to tell one of the biggest stories, a story that takes us from the beginning of the universe to the emergence of stars and planets and people, and then on to the very far future. So the biggest canvas, if you will, that we paint in order to understand how we fit into the cosmos.
A friend once said to you, "I do mathematics because once you prove a theorem, it stands forever." What did this mean to you at the time?
Well, at the time, it really shook me up, and it changed my perspective on things, because I'd never really thought about the need that we have to have a lasting legacy, to be involved in something that will outlive our own physical form. And at the time, I loved math and I loved science, but I didn't really think about why I did. And when he said that, it struck me, yes, that is the power of math, right? You write down a theorem, if you prove it correctly, it will be true till the end of time. It will never not be true. And that struck me as a deep insight into why I was doing what I do, and perhaps why we humans do what we do.
So the timelessness of potentially finding something that'll live forever is a big motivator for you.
It is. And over my studies, I've recognized through the power of physics and insight that in the end, nothing really lasts forever. Abstractly, a theorem will always be true, but if there are no brains around, no cogitating beings who are going to take in that theorem, then is it really there? And that has actually shifted my focus away from just thinking about things that will last to thinking about what we do here.
Apropos of that, let's do an excerpt from the book here. We emerge from laws that, as far as we can tell, are timeless, and yet we exist for the briefest moment of time. We are guided by laws that operate without concern for destination, and yet we constantly ask ourselves where we are headed. We are shaped by laws that seem not to require an underlying rationale, and yet we persistently seek meaning and purpose. I'm going to bring up that other great philosopher here, Douglas Adams, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, who famously informed us that the meaning of life is
42.
42.
Yes.
Which I agree with. That was Jackie Robinson's number, so I think it's
That's
eternal.
true. Yeah.
I think it's eternal as well. But one does have to ask, is this a fool's errand to seek meaning in a meaningless universe?
I don't think so. And my view is that we humans, back to your first question, we do tell a whole variety of different stories, each of which can provide illumination into different qualities of the world. So the physicists, we tend to focus on the most fundamental level, what we call the reductionist account, the particles and the laws that come together to yield structures in the universe. But then you build on top of that. The chemist puts those particles together into atoms and molecules. The biologist comes along and puts it together into life. And then we go further, and the neuroscientist, the philosopher, the psychologist are going to speak to the nature of consciousness. And the humanist is going to focus on the reasons why we create art or tell stories, religious stories, mythological tales. So meaning, in the human sense, is something that we focus upon in those higher level stories. And those are real, powerful explorations. They sit upon the physicist account, but you need it all in order to have a full understanding of reality.
I understand that the journey is exciting to you because you're finding out new building blocks every step of the way, the more and more you explore and do your work. But does it ever utterly frustrate you that you will never solve this riddle, ever in your lifetime, despite how much time you spend on it? And that goes for everybody else who does what you do. How does that not utterly frustrate you?
Well, that's a real downer way of putting it. Yeah.
But it's true.
No, it does. It absolutely is true. Yeah. And as a physicist, I recognize that my journey is something that, in the best of circumstances, will take us one baby step forward. But to me, I feel part of an ongoing exploration that goes right back to the ancient Greeks and sweeps through the history of human exploration. And hopefully, I'll contribute a little something that will allow us to pursue that journey even further into the future. And it's that continuum of human exploration, that dramatic exploration. I think it's one of the most dramatic stories that we humans have been involved with, to try to figure out the laws, the ingredients, the principles that allow us to figure out why they're stars, why they're planets, why there are people. And that, to me, is deeply satisfying to be part of the exploration. I don't need to be here when whatever the final chapter of that story is written.
It's enough for you to move the ball from the 3-yard line to the 4-yard line.
It is, because it allows me, and this is really the vital point, it allows me to feel connected to a much wider cosmos. I mean, when I'm doing my work, and on occasion, and it is only on occasion, discover something that no one has seen before, and it gives us some new insight into the way the world works, I feel a connection to the stars and the galaxies. I feel part of the sweep of space and time. And for that brief moment, it is enormously exciting. And that's really where the gratifying nature of the exploration comes from.
Do you, I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but like Galileo, Ptolemy, Brian Greene?
No, absolutely not.
No?
I wish that was a pattern that would naturally come to mind.
You don't think of that?
No, because those are towering intellects that happen, once in a generation, that are able to peel back the veil obscuring nature, and they are singular. And as much as I wish that I'd make a contribution on par with them, I haven't, and I don't think that I will. But it doesn't matter, in the sense of I'm part of the human search, and that, to me, really is vital. I think that we all should feel deeply proud of what we've accomplished. We can sit down with a piece of paper and the equations of what's called quantum field theory and calculate properties of electrons using equations that agree with our observations to 10 decimal places. I think every person on planet Earth should stand up and take a bow, because I feel that that's a collective achievement of the species. Sure, there are individuals who have their names associated with these discoveries, but it's all of us, allowing us to survive, allowing us to be here, allowing the institutions necessary for these kinds of explorations to take place at all.
For the record, Galileo never had 1 million Twitter followers, and you do. Okay, so here we go. Let's go back. Evolution. After the Big Bang created time itself, when does evolution come onto the scene?
Well, most of us learned about evolution as a process that is relevant once there's already life. I mean, that's how Darwin described it. It was the way in which different beings would compete for the limited resources in the environment, and progeny would differ from parents, and if they differed in such a way that allowed them to excel in that competition, they would then propagate those qualities to the next generation, and so forth. But there's a version of evolution that's been developed long after Darwin wrote down the initial idea, which kicks in much earlier. It kicks in at the level of particles, of molecules. You can imagine, once molecules learn the trick of making copies of themselves, having progeny, if you will, then those molecules that can reproduce faster, better, more efficiently are the ones that are going to grab the molecular resources in the environment, and they will dominate the molecular demographics. It's a kind of chemical combat. And that chemical combat yields ever more refined molecular structures that over time, you can imagine, yield the molecules that are required for life. So to answer your question, it could start way, way back in the history, long before life existed.
Depends when you want to start the clock here.
Exactly. And it's important to know about this, because you don't need a guiding intelligence to get refined molecular combinations. And that is the power of these ideas. Just physics acting itself on the ingredients that make up everything is enough to yield the kinds of ingredients that are required for life and things that think.
Entropy.
Yeah.
What is entropy, and what role does it play in the story you're trying to tell?
It's a vital part of the story. In fact, I view it as a counterpart to evolution. So evolution is really good at getting matter to come together into organized structures that ultimately yield life. But entropy acts in the opposite direction. It's a fundamental physical principle that shows us that things tend to go from order toward disorder, from structure to disintegration. Things tend to wither, they age and fall apart. And so you basically, over the cosmic timeline, have a battle between these two forces. Entropy, driving things to fall apart and decay. Evolution, driving things to come together and build interesting structures. And we, fortunate beings, are at a moment in the cosmological unfolding where evolution has at least been able to keep entropy at bay. But if you look to the very far future, ultimately entropy will win, and much as you indicated earlier, all things ultimately fall apart.
When will entropy win?
Well, long time scales, thankfully quite long time scales. But certainly with our current level of understanding, if you go, say, 10 to the 30, 10 to the 40 years into the future, then entropy really flexes its muscle. Stars will fall apart, planets fall apart, living structures, it's hard to imagine that they can exist. Even black holes themselves, if you wait long enough, Stephen Hawking showed us that they disintegrate. They fall apart into a bath of particles that wafts through the universe. But again, take note of the time scale that I mentioned. We are right now about 10 to the 10 years since the Big Bang. I'm talking 10 to the 30, 40, 50, 10 to the 100 years from the Big Bang. That is exponentially far into the future, even relative to the time that goes back to the Big Bang itself.
So we don't have to sweat it ourselves.
We don't have to sweat it, but it does have the potential of a profound impact on how we think about ourselves. We are part of a very limited window on the cosmological timeline. Life didn't exist for much of the past, and life is unlikely to exist for much of the far future.
Are we a cosmic fluke?
Could be. We don't really know. It could be that there was just this accident of processes that happened to take place on planet Earth, allowing these particles to come together into more organized shapes that can ultimately walk around and have conversations. On the other hand, there are other people who put forward very interesting and compelling but tentative theories that if you have a situation where you have a star like the sun and a planet like the Earth, it could be way out there in space, that situation, energy raining down on a planet might naturally, under relatively common configurations, yield life and yield perhaps even intelligent life. So we just don't know whether we are alone and singular or whether we are commonplace throughout the universe.
Give me your theory on this. The universe, I gather, was alone for 14 billion years before something known as consciousness was developed. Do you think the universe was just lonely and wanted to know how to feel?
Well, it's an anthropomorphic
Yes,
version
true.
of the universe. But if I sort of take that as a poetic description, I don't think that there is a necessity of mind, a necessity of consciousness. Again, controversial. There are some who think that consciousness is the basis of all reality, and we are simply tapping into something more fundamental than the physical stuff that we see in the world around us. I don't hold that perspective. My view is that consciousness is nothing but highly organized particles coursing through, in our case, a 3-pound gloppy gray structure inside of our heads. It is just particles and the laws of physics acting themselves out in a highly choreographed manner. And where did that come from? I think there's a natural progression from the things that we've discussed, the organization that evolution is able to instill in the particle arrangements. And ultimately, in one example at least, it yields the kinds of conscious self-awareness that we all experience. Again, not proven, but my view is that you don't need anything but physics and particles to yield the inner world that we experience.
Well, that requires this follow-up then, which I've asked of Lawrence Krauss and of Richard Dawkins, which is there a role for religion in your understanding of all of this?
There is. In my view, I believe, although I don't want to put words in their mouths, is somewhat different from the gentleman that you just made reference to. There, among some of my colleagues, is a sense that we need to wipe religion off the face of the earth. It was something that arose in the infancy of the species, and it is time to outgrow it. That's not my view. My view is that science is a powerful tool for examining and understanding the objective world that's out there and available to all of us to study and experience. But there's another world, the subjective world of inner experience. And I'm not saying that the world's religion in some literal sense are relevant to that journey, but the guidance from that perspective, I like to call it a spiritual perspective, a spiritual quest that allows us to go inward and examine our own conscious awareness and think about why we're here and think about the things that matter to us. For some, a religious practice can enhance that inward journey. So I agree that if you have a literal interpretation of religion, that will not work. You cannot use religion to calculate the electron's magnetic moment that I mentioned before. But you can use these kinds of spiritual journeys to have a deeper sense of who you are and how you fit into the cosmic whole.
Dawkins sat in that chair and said, do you believe in fairies, Steve? Because if you believe in fairies, then you can believe in God. But if you think fairies are ridiculous, then you have to believe God's ridiculous too.
Yeah, so my view on that is it's making use of a certain barometer for truth, which is the ability of your ideas to describe the external reality. And that measure certainly gives science an enormous leg up over these other ideas, which don't stand up to that kind of objective standard of truth. But that is not the only kind of truth in the world. I love that kind of truth. I spend my life trying to develop that kind of truth. But the inner subjective truth of our experience in the world is a vital part of that story too. And that is a personal truth. It is a subjective quality of the world. And for some, the religious practice can give insight and can augment your experience of that inner world.
Let me read 3 quotes here and then I'll get you to react to them. Ernest Becker wrote in The Denial of Death in 1973, "What does it mean to be a self-conscious animal? The idea is ludicrous if it is not monstrous. It means to know that one is food for worms." David Foster Wallace once said, "I'm going to die and die very much alone, and the rest of the world is going to go merrily on without me." And Brian Greene wrote this year, "Nabokov's description of a human life as a brief crack of light between 2 eternities of darkness may apply to the phenomenon of life itself." Okay, you've told us the sun's going to explode. There's a finite time on the earth. What if in the distant future we could upload our consciousness into computers and have it all shoot out deep into the universe?
Well, that would be an interesting thing if we could actually do that, to have our conscious selves embodied in a different form that might at least stave off the descriptions in each of those quotes. But each of those quotes would still apply, and they resonate with me fully, as my version of it suggests strongly. We are the only species on the planet that knows of our impermanence, and that is deeply distressing, but also deeply informative. And even if we can extend life, as medical science no doubt will, and even if we're able to extend conscious awareness, perhaps in the manner that you suggest, uploading our consciousness into some more robust environment, silicon or whatever, or send it out, as you say, into the universe, if you really look at the cosmological story and recognize that even protons, they're the very heart of all complex matter, our theory strongly suggests that they will fall apart if you wait long enough. So it's hard to imagine anything truly outlasting the entropic drive to ever greater disorder in the cosmos. You can hold it at bay for some period of time, and maybe science can extend that period of time, but I think it's likely a fool's errand to imagine that it will be with us forever.
Entropy is going to win in the end.
It will win in the end.
Just the reality. Let me do something here from Pico Iyer, who wrote in his recent book, Autumn Light, "We cherish things precisely because they cannot last. It is their frailty that adds sweetness to their beauty." I see you nodding your head. You agree?
I totally agree. And look, there are so many examples in literature where great authors have imagined a world that was immortal. And in almost all of those descriptions, it doesn't turn out well, right? The characters get bored. The characters look for some challenge, but in an immortal world, challenges take on a very different quality. Who's afraid of doing anything if you're guaranteed that you will still be here? What does it mean to triumph over some challenge if you try hard enough and long enough and you've got an eternity to do it? Well, certainly you're going to triumph at some point. So I agree. The finite nature of life and the finite nature of everything gives a certain value to the here and the now that would evaporate if everything lasted forever.
It is a great motive not to waste your time while you're here, isn't it?
If you have an infinite amount of it, what would it mean to waste it?
Exactly.
So exactly right.
Yeah. Okay, one more quote. Futurist, technologist Ray Kurzweil once said, "Death gives meaning to our lives. It gives importance and value to time. Time would become meaningless if there were too much of it." It is funny, though.
I'm surprised with that quote. I didn't think that quote would go in that direction because Ray really thinks that we're on the precipice of being immortal. At least that's what he wrote about in one of his books.
And yet he agrees with you here.
Yeah, I'm surprised.
We like to be full of surprises
Yeah,
in this
that's
program.
good.
Does death and the potential end of all life in the universe, therefore, if we're going to come full circle here, give our lives the meaning that you were talking about at the beginning of this conversation?
For me, it does.
It does.
Right? You know, for me, the recognition that we are impermanent and the recognition that we are the output of random quantum laws, right, that do stretch back to the Big Bang. And sort of in the book, I walk you through the various key moments in that journey. But the case is, each of those results could have turned out differently, that way instead of this, yielding a world in which we would not be here. So the very fact that we are here is astoundingly unlikely. And beyond just the odds, look at what our random collection of particles is able to do. Shaped by evolution and natural selection, we're so exquisitely ordered that we can illuminate mystery, right? We can experience wonder. We can create beauty. And I'm really talking about everything that goes back to the pyramids, the writing of Macbeth and Hamlet, the composing of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the discovery of quantum mechanics and general relativity. So these capacities are what fill me with the only word I can use, gratitude. Gratitude for being alive, gratitude for being part of the species. And that fills me with a deep sense of meaning and purpose just to be part of that journey.
Having said that, do you have your moments of depression and doubt? And let's pluck it right from the headlines today. When you see the world engulfed in pandemics, which could end it, I mean, entropy is winning, right?
Yeah, well, you can't help but, as a human being, react to the local things that happen in the world around us. And again, it sort of resonates with what I was describing in the book. There are these parallel stories. Of course, even when I'm thinking on the grandest of timescales and thinking about meaning and purpose in that environment, in parallel with that, I'm thinking about the things that are more local, happening right here. They can almost feel parochial by comparison, but they matter to our day-to-day lives. So yeah, do I have my moments of doubt and darkness and depression and anxiety about things that are happening in the real world? Absolutely. But at the same time, I am able, because of sort of the way I think about things, to pull back and see that in context. And it does give a different perspective. I think it gives uncanny perspective that I definitely take solace in.
Did you know Carl Sagan?
I met him, but I didn't really know him.
I asked because you two, one can occasionally see these similarities in people who do what you guys do, which is a kind of, you're men of science, but you've got a poetry about the way you see the world. Does that come with the job?
It can, and certainly Carl Sagan was a master of that. And as I was a kid growing up and watching his shows and reading his books before I was able to one day shake his hand, I did at Cornell University when I started there as a professor, he inspired me. So it's gratifying to hear that you hear some resonance in the way we look at the world.
You didn't do the Carson show, as he did, but...
I did Letterman.
You did Letterman. Okay, well,
Colbert.
Yeah, I know. You've been on Colbert a lot, haven't you?
Yeah, no, Colbert loves these ideas. He's incredibly smart, obviously, comedic in his approach, but deeply thinking about these issues.
Is there something, though, about the world of atoms or the world of nature that brings out the poetry in you guys?
I think so, because when you're able to look into the inner workings of reality and also experience reality as we humans do on the everyday scales, it adds a richness. You know, Richard Feynman, one of the great physicists, he once said, you know, he was told by somebody that reducing a flower to its molecules and atoms takes away the poetry. And Feynman famously said, no, it doesn't. It adds to the poetry because I can smell the rose and I can see it as you do, but I can also see its inner workings. And that accentuates the poetry.
If people want to Google him, it's F-E-Y-N, right?
Yes, exactly
Feynman,
right. Yeah.
F-E-Y-N. Okay, let's finish up on this. Writers may write, scientists do science to achieve a legacy, to outlive their deaths. If you think of some of the great writers in history, they seem, a lot of them, pretty miserable. It doesn't seem to be the case with scientists. And even a guy like Stephen Hawking, who had every reason in the world to be miserable, always seemed to be this great happy warrior towards finding more information. I think Feynman played the bongos, didn't he?
He did. He did.
Okay, what do you think accounts for this difference?
Well, I think it's basically what I was saying a moment ago. We have a perspective on the human condition that doesn't eliminate the trauma and the anxiety and, if you will, the depression that some of us can go through, and recognizing the difficulties of life, the difficulties of being a social species, trying to navigate life on a rock that's circling a nondescript star in the outskirts of an ordinary galaxy. So we have that feeling too, but when you pull back and you think about, as Carl Sagan did, the Earth is a pale blue dot floating in the void. When you think about, as I describe in this book, our moment in cosmic history just being a little part of this grand expanse, that perspective, I think, allows you to take in the world in a different way. And I do think it's a way that ultimately is uplifting.
I want to ask you, I know you're not a political scientist, you're a scientist of a different kind, but I am curious in your view about the fact that the person who holds the highest office in the land, in your land, seems to be quite anti-science. In fact, he started this whole COVID-19 thing by saying it was probably a hoax by the deep state. As a man of science, how troubled are you by the fact that there is somebody so anti-science in the White House?
Well, it's deeply troubling. It's tragic on the level of trying to push science forward in an environment that doesn't value the insights of science. But now we see that not only is it tragic in that abstract sense, it's tragic at a very human level. People may die by virtue of policies that are driven by an anti-science perspective. So this really brings it right down to brass tacks, and it's an awful circumstance that I hope will go away sometime quite soon. You know, in this book, I'm talking about huge timescales. And the 4 years that this individual ran I hope that it will only be 4 years. That will be a blink of an eye, I hope, in the grand unfolding of human life on this planet, because it is an awful period.
What if he's the president until the end of time?
That will definitely require a new chapter to be written in the book.
Well, I plucked that line, of course, from the title of your book, which is Until the End of Time, Mind, Matter, and Our Search for Meaning in an Evolving Universe. I not only want to thank you for coming here and being so brilliant, if I may say, but I really wish you well with your bad back, which
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Herniated discs are no damn fun, so good luck with that.
Thank you.
That's Brian Greene. Thanks so much,
Thank
Brian.
you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.